Hi, we're going to see how this goes tonight. This is my very first Facebook Live episode. It's called Moments in History. And I'm Linda Shenton Matchett, and I am a historical author. And I write Christian historical fiction that's primarily set in World War II. And I thought I would use this opportunity to share things about my books, the research about my books, do cover reveals, just lots of tidbits that I found while writing my books that I thought you might find interesting. So, again, I said this is the first time I've ever done this, so we'll see just how well this works. Not sure exactly how long I will chat, and pardon me for checking my notes periodically. But if I go off script, I do tend to ramble, and that probably does not make for a good video. So let's see here. I won't probably be talking a whole lot tonight. I wanted to kind of give this thing a test drive, see how it worked, and so on and so forth. So let's see now. Just to let you know up front, my website is www.lindashentonmatchett.com. And if you enjoy the videos, if you enjoy history, you may want to consider signing up for my newsletter. And you can do that by going to my website and clicking the button on the right-hand side that says sign up for my newsletter. Probably pretty obvious. And again, the website is www.lindashentonmatchett.com. So who would like to talk history? I know I do. Let's see here. So the episode today is going to be related to my full-length mystery that's called Under Fire. And it was finished and published in July of last year. And it's about Ruth Brown, who is a journalist in a small town, New Hampshire. Thought I would write what I know. And then she follows clues about her sister's disappearance over to England, and she manages to do that by getting signed up as a war correspondent. So in doing research to get that right, I did quite a bit of research about war correspondents, and so type yes in the comments if you are aware that there were 2,000 certified journalists, war correspondents that the government certified to send overseas, and of that 2,000, a whopping 127 were women. So not too many were women. And some of the more famous ones that you may or may not have heard of, Lee Miller, she actually was a model, and she ended up deciding that she liked being behind the camera much better than she liked being in front of the camera. And she was one. We have Dickie Chappelle, who actually got her start in World War II and then ended up covering the Korean War as well as Vietnam War, and ended up losing her life in Vietnam. But she was quite a woman from what I understand. Martha Gellhorn was also a World War II correspondent. She was Hemingway's third wife, and unfortunately spent most of her career reminding people that she was no longer Hemingway's wife, and that she was indeed a journalist, and a very good journalist at that. So she had a little bit of an uphill battle with her career. Margaret Bourke-White was a photojournalist, and she was known to be all kinds of places she shouldn't have been. In fact, I'll talk about that in a little while. But these are just four of the women who were certified war correspondents. And what you had to do to be a war correspondent, in case you didn't know, was actually to get a background check done by the government on you and your family. In fact, Margaret Bourke-White commented once that once the background check was completed, you did not have any secrets from the government, and neither did your ancestors. So apparently they dug fairly deep. So she had lots to say about that. So about Margaret Bourke-White, again, she was a bit of a pistol, and she asked if she could cover the invasion at Normandy, and was told no. As a matter of fact, no, you may not. As was someone who would not take no for an answer, she hid herself on a hospital ship. So she snuck on board And all the stories claim that she hid in the bathroom for the entire voyage over, and then managed to sneak into one of the landing craft in order to get off the boat and cover the invasion. She did lose her credentials, but she did get her story, and that apparently was what was most important to her. I can't even imagine. I can't imagine. I've cruised, but that's with drinks that have umbrellas and people waiting on you. I cannot imagine being stuffed in a troop transport in the bathroom and then sneaking around to find my way out. So if any of you are big news watchers, type in the comments, either print or broadcast journalists, who your favorite female journalist is. So a little bit about research. Most writers are research junkies. We love digging and finding things out. We try not to give you a huge dump in the books, but the research helps us to be accurate in our writing. There's a lot that we don't share. So just to give you some information, one of the things that I needed to research about England, having never been, was the city of London itself. And my husband is one of my biggest supporters. And for Christmas one year, he purchased or managed to find, I'm not sure if he purchased them or just managed to find them. These are tube schedules. And let's see, I got 1939, 1941, and 1943. And the reason, let me show you that. So there you go. Those are the tube schedules. Paper was at a premium. It was very precious, but tube stops actually got bombed or taken out of service for a variety of reasons, sometimes as a shelter, but mostly as a result of bombings. And so a stop that might be available in June of 1939 was no longer available in November of 1941. So the government had a tough time keeping up with which of the stops were active, but they did indeed do so, and they regularly printed new tube schedules. So I needed to make sure that when I had Ruth wandering around London, that I did not send her to a tube stop that no longer existed, or I had her in a shelter in a tube stop that was not a shelter. So it's important to get the facts right, because trust me, somebody will have been there or read about it or know about it, and they will call you on it, and accuracy is important. So I used the subway system in the Washington, D.C. area quite a bit. I lived most of my adult life there and commuted downtown on a regular basis, not every day for my job, but I had projects down there I supported, and so I did use the stops. I almost called it the tube. It was the Metro in Washington. And I got to use it so often that I actually knew at one point you could give me the name of a stop and I could tell you which side of the train the doors opened on. So you kind of got used to it as you went. And you could tell by what people looked like when they got on the train, you could probably get it right as to where they were going to get off. You know, the guys in the three-piece suits got off at certain stops because that was the financial district. Certainly the touristy-looking people carrying the cameras got off at the mall or at the Smithsonian and at the stops that accessed many of the tourist sites in Washington. So it was kind of fun to see these folks and then make up stories or try and figure out which stop they were going to get off and see if you were right, depending on when they got off. So I needed to make sure that Ruth got it right and got on and off the right places. The other piece of research that Wes got for me, and I know it's too big for you to see, and you can't hardly see how close it is, but he purchased me a booklet that was an atlas and a guide to London and the suburbs. And it was published in 1932, and it had a fold-out map. Very cool. Again, I needed to know if she got out of a building, if she turned right or left, which direction she should be going, and where I would have her going to get it correct. I have an incredibly terrible sense of direction. I can get lost in the mall parking lot. In fact, I always parked my car in the same spot so that I would go out the same store so that I would be able to find my car. During the war, England was sure that Hitler would eventually invade their country. And because of that, they took down signage. They did not want the Germans to show up and then be able to see street signs and directional signs, basically that said, you know, this way to Buckingham Palace if you want to invade and take the king and queen. So they took down, all the authorities took down most of the tube stops and the street signs. And so it was very, very difficult. And coupled with the blackout rules, I can't even imagine what it was like to get around in London. I probably would have just gotten incredibly lost on a regular basis. In fact, I had Ruth get lost on a couple of occasions just to have her experience that, knowing that having been in a very small town and then showing up in a huge city like London with no street signs and then having her try to find her way around. So that was kind of fun to get her to do that. One thing I am really proud of is that one of my editors who was reading the manuscript before it was published asked me when I had been in England, that she recognized that the authenticity and accuracy of the information about London was very good, and she asked me when I had been there, and at that point I had not. So again, using my tube stops and my maps, I managed to get things right, which was very exciting to hear. So if you have ever traveled overseas, type in the comments yes, and then you can tell me where you have been. Oh, and Susan has joined the party. Welcome, Susan. This is very exciting. So I am talking about my book and research, Under Fire, and some of the things that I did to get it right when I wrote the book. So if you have not figured out by listening to me drone on about maps and tube schedules and tube maps, then you haven't guessed that I am totally a history junkie and I love talking about history, and I hope you do too. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I do plan to do these every Thursday at 6:45 p.m. And that's if I don't have something diabolical happen to my schedule that would prevent it. But I do plan to do this every Thursday. So if there are topics you're interested in, if there is something you wish you knew about, or if you had a comment about my book or a question about one of my books, please send me a private message or type it in the comments, and I will do my best to answer it. So next Thursday, I believe, is April 5th. So tune in on my page April 5th at 6:45 for some more moments in history. And I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Thanks for stopping by.